That's good to. So I'd just like to extend a huge welcome to Daniel, Claire, as well as Deepika. Welcome to Wits University, and welcome to the Center for Researching Education and Labor. And the seminar today is hosted in collaboration with our colleagues from Caleb and all of his colleagues in science. I know your division keeps changing, so I'm going to say science and maths and whatever. What else are you all now? Technology and science and technology. Okay. Division. And we have worked with many of the colleagues around sustainability issues and teacher development within WITS since I've been here for the last 10 years or so. So it's really good to come together and to talk about and share and listen to some of the work that Daniel's going to be sharing. So our speaker today is Daniel Fischer. Am I saying that right, Daniel?
Yes, very good. Very German. Okay.
All right, but a huge welcome. And I'm not going to read Daniel's entire CV because we would really like to hear him speak as well. But Daniel is a professor of sustainability education, and he has a very keen interest in methodologies from the hearing. And he's been involved in a lot of very progressive and innovative research around methodologies to research sustainability. And I'm hoping that he's going to be sharing some of that kind of approach to thinking about how we should be thinking about sustainability education in really difficult times when things are extremely complex. Looking at the kinds of projects that Daniel has been involved in, he's interested in issues like mindfulness and how they can help to bolster education. Issues like storytelling and how methodologies like storytelling can bring an innovativeness to how we think about connecting people and the natural environment. So huge welcome again, Daniel, and we're really looking forward to the seminar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Daniel. Daniel will present, and then we have some time for question and answer. So I'm going to ask you to please keep a note of all of your questions, and then we will take it at the end. Is that good? Over to you, Daniel, and a huge welcome again.
Yeah, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you for welcoming us so warmly here at WITS. We just came out of a meeting with your UNESCO chairholder, Professor Roxana Osman, and it was very inspiring, and we had so much to share that we ran late, so apologies for that. Yes, with my talk today, I would like to showcase some of the work that we've been doing as a starting point for hopefully a good conversation, because we are here also primarily to learn, I have to say. So we are running this big Erasmus project that you just mentioned, that we're just getting started with Caleb and his team here at WITS being involved. We're just trying to wrap our heads around what kind of work has been done here in this space. So I think it's a very timely moment for us to come here and share a bit about our work and get into a conversation with you. I already started with preliminary remarks, so I would like to make 3 remarks. One is that this is my office. This is maybe not so interesting, of a great interest to you, but I decided to include that picture just to show you that this is the window that's where I can stand and look out to our beautiful campus. It was lush and green here, but it is a certain perspective that comes with our work. That's why I put this in. Yeah, we're based in Lüneburg, which is just south of Hamburg in northern Germany. We're doing work also a lot on sustainable consumption, which has probably a very different context here. So I just want us all to be mindful of that specific context. The other thing I wanted to share is, I see it's actually wrong. This says Roads 25. There's another QR code. Don't use this. There's another QR code to this presentation that comes up towards the end, where I've shared my slides, where you can also find additional resources that I'm talking about. Yeah? And the last comment is, you can already sense it. I have a tendency to speak very fast. So I hope it's not too fast for you. Otherwise, just raise your hand and I'll try to slow down a bit. I have a lot to share from our work, so I'm getting very excited and it might run a bit fast. So what I want to do in my talk today is I want to discuss three main issues or three main topics. One is to revisit basically where we stand in our field of education for sustainable development. And I'll use ESD from now on, Education for Sustainable Development. So I think there are some persistent challenges despite all progress made, and there are some maybe promising new directions that I want to talk about. This is maybe more conceptually. The second part, as this is also a research environment here, I would like to highlight some of the methodologies that we've used in some research projects to study what I have presented, will have presented by then as the first topic. And lastly, I also want to give you at least a few ideas, maybe for the conversations after this seminar, about some other work that we are doing in our group. So I would start with the first topic. And I think I'm meeting all of you beyond your level, not beyond, you are far more advanced to not know this, but we have, of course, the SDGs. We have SDG 4, we have SDG 4.7, and you see up to the top right, it's a bit cut out, the UN General Assembly reaffirming that ESD is a key enabler to all other sustainable development goals. It's not just one squeezed into the 17, but it's a key enabler of all other goals. We have a very ambitious way that goal 4.7 or target 4.7 is phrased to ensure that all learners will have acquired the skills and knowledges needed. And this is a very strong language. I mean, all member states agreed on that. It's a very short time frame up to 2030. And I put it in because I think it is an indication of how consensual this has become by now, that we agree on this ambition level, basically, on an international scale. Those of you who have worked in the field of ESD know that there has been a decade by the United Nations from 2005 to 2014 that has really helped to bring ESD into education discourses. So it's a time also to celebrate that. It's 20 years ago already. And I think another indication of what we have achieved is that we now have a very good, in my opinion, program in place, ESD for 2030, which highlights 5 priority areas. So to infuse policy, to work to transform learning environments, to build the capacity of educators, to empower youth and mobilize youth, and to also work with local action. So I think these are all very well chosen and thoughtfully chosen priority areas. And we have a new UNESCO recommendation. I'm not sure how many of you know about this. In Germany, it's not very well known that we have this UNESCO recommendation. And you could say, for good reasons, oh, just another paper published by UNESCO. Of course, you could say this, but this is a very special paper. It's the only piece of international lawmaking in education that we have, and that all member states agreed to. So this is a very strong recommendation, and sustainable development is not just one of the several topics mentioned in there, it's at the core of this recommendation that highlights basically what a vision for future education looks like. And it's also good to know because we can hold our governments accountable. We can go to our government officials and say, but our government signed up on this. So we have really made some good progress in bringing ESD into the mainstream of education, but, and now it's the but, there's still a lot of work to do. We have had the midterm review of the SDGs, and that showed or revealed again how far we are from meeting certain targets. If you look at our SDG 4, we see that 58 million more children would be in school, 1.7 more primary school teachers would have been trained. Of course, we had COVID too, but just to kind of highlight that we're still far from having reached even the targets that we set ourselves for this decade. But this is not the only challenge that we have. I think we have made progress, and we can agree on this, but there are also some more fundamental challenges that are still persisting. And I want to highlight 3 of such challenges, and also at the end try to sketch what a solution to these challenges could be. The first challenge, I think, in our field is that ESD is still associated by many people as a problem-driven education. When you look at textbooks, teaching resources, look at the images there. They often depict problems. And they are there, these problems. It's not to say that they are not there, but we are very often starting from the problem and using education as a way to tackle these problems. And that's also true for universities, even for well-intended initiatives. This is from my university. We have already become a climate-neutral university in 2007. Arizona State University in the United States, where I also worked for 2 years, they had the goal of becoming net zero. And you see, just look at the terms, climate neutral, net zero. This is really terminology that speaks to reducing harm, but it's not providing a positive vision. Yeah, we're just trying to minimize the impacts, the harmful impacts we're doing. And maybe we have even done a too good job of educating students. I'm sometimes wondering, and this is a personal note here, when we look at our young learners today. This is an image that my son actually gave me, that he drew at school. It's in German, but I have a translation here. So he came up, he drew this at school, and that was not an assignment. He just did it by himself. He said, earlier days, climate good, but not for much longer. We need to act. And then the future, and that is dated to 2666 for some reason. It says, the last breath of humankind. So, and my son is not a depressed young child. He's a very cheerful young person, but it shows that he has sensed what is going on. And that many students, I think, know about the urgency and the scale of the problems we're having. So there are good reasons, of course, to be worried. And this is from a study of across, I think, 10 different countries here, of young learners between 16 and 25. That reflects kind of also the diversity and complexity of emotional responses that young learners have to the problems we're facing. So sadness, being afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, guilty. There's not just climate anxiety, there's a whole scope of different emotional responses. And I think there are good reasons to be worried, of course, that this is maybe the natural response if you've understood the challenges. I think many of you might know these images here just to show how the planetary boundaries have been breached in a very short period of time, more and more of these planetary boundaries. And that leads me to my next point, that I think it's not just a problem that we have a problem-centric legacy. There's a second problem is that sustainability or sustainable development has become a very contested and ideologically charged field. So these are two examples, again, from our context here in Germany and the Netherlands, actually. So we had in the summer last year, we had a phenomenon of young people who glued themselves to the motorways to prevent the traffic from flowing, basically. So we had huge traffic congestions. And you can imagine that the drivers didn't really like it very much, that the young people sat there. So they were removed forcefully at times. But they were protesting about the lack of policy measures to curb carbon emissions. Yeah? Specifically when it comes to, we are a motorist country, as you know, with all the car brands we have. So it's a strong lobby here. On the other hand, we had another protest on the motorway, but this time it was farmers who were protesting against policy measures that asked them to reduce their use of fertilizers. Yeah, because they were really impacting nitrogen cycles and exceeding tolerated levels. So there were policies put in place and the farmers were protesting against those. So you see very different groups, but it's around the same issues, but it's very conflicted and contested. And what we see often, and that's where the term polarization comes in, is that we're not just debating issues. You know, what would be good maximum levels for fertilizers in a certain region? That could be an issue that we have different opinions on, maybe we can argue about. But what we see a lot is affective polarization. So groups actually start to dislike each other and not listen to each other anymore and being unable to argue with each other. So you identify someone as being part of a different group. It's really social psychology here. And we are increasingly losing our ability as a society to debate these issues in a sensible way. So, and sustainability is part of that. And I just want to show you from our context an example, a very recent example from a political campaign. So we had the election of the European Parliament. That was in 2024. So the European Parliament in Brussels was re-elected. Every country runs its own election. And this is the program of one of our youngest parties, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, it's called. It's a right-wing nationalist populist party. And in their program, they were saying that the EU Commission often adopts the agenda dictated by various interest groups and lobbyists. So you can see a bit of a conspiracy sense here. And then it says, the common goal of these actors is to create a centralized European education area that does not follow the humanistic ideal of education and in which students are not encouraged to think independently. So they're accusing Brussels and the EU of brainwashing our youth, basically. And they say EU-driven programs such as ESD, inclusion and gender mainstreaming are evidence of this. So you could say, okay, we all have these right-wing parties, these populist parties, that's the rhetoric they use, and we're used to that. But then look at the election we had in February, and they became the second strongest party in Germany. 20%, every fifth voter went for this party. So just as an indication that yes, ESD is not something that we all agree on, that we all work towards in a consensual way, but this is a contested space. And it always has been, and it needs to be. Yeah, we need to discuss and debate it critically. I don't know, those of you who have been longer in the field might know this paper by Bob Jickling. It's very famous. I can actually add it to the Google folder. I think it's not in there. I think it's from 1993 or so, shortly after the Agenda 21 has been released, the inauguration document of the sustainability discourse in policy making. And he said, why I don't want my children to be educated for sustainable development. And he's not a member of the AfD. He's an environmental educator, a passionate environmental educator. The point that he was making was that we should not let policy take over education to implement its goals. That is not the purpose of education. We need to keep a critical distance. We need to reflect on what it is that we're doing. So we should not be just implementation agents for international policy discourse. So a second challenge. I want to come to a third challenge, and that is, I keep that very short. I think for many educators, the success that we've had with implementing ESD, it's now in Germany mandatory to do it in schools. The success also comes at a cost, basically. And that cost is that many teachers now sit there, have to do ESD, and have no idea what it is about. And then they look at resources. This is a UNESCO document, really good learning objectives for the SDGs. These are other examples. You see many, many topics, many issues. So teachers might end up with a question, so what is ESD and what is not ESD anymore? Is it okay when I have a unit on recycling, can I check the ESD box? Did I do my job? So I think the challenge is what is really at the core of ESD? How do we distinguish more relevant from less relevant ways of addressing ESD in the classroom? So in sum, I think that these three challenges, the problem-based approach, the doom and gloom, the moralizing or indoctrinating, the accusation of ESD being indoctrinating, and also the laundry list approach to ESD, that they all pose challenge to what it is that we want to achieve. And that is that ESD is not just a topic in the curriculum, but that it is a way to think about what relevant quality education might mean in the 21st century. Yeah, as a vision basically for that education. And I think that's standing in our way. So what I want to suggest is, or share with you basically, is how we have recently began to work on what we call a needs-based approach to sustainability education. And I want to share a bit what that is about, and then come back to these challenges and share a bit how that might help to address some of these challenges. Why needs-based approach? Sustainable development is at the heart about needs. We tend to forget that every now and then. But if you look at the seminal definition of sustainable development, as it has been coined by the Brundtland Commission in '87 already, and this is the most widely cited definition of sustainable development, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this. It defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So you see, needs is featuring twice. It's at the core of what sustainable development is about. So that makes it an interesting starting point when we think about what might be at the core of ESD also. But what are needs? That's then a very tricky and sensitive question. So what are needs? We all have needs, of course. We might all have very different needs, and everything we want might be a need that we think we have. So I think we need to understand better or we need to also theoretically understand what could be needs. And one approach that we've used a lot is an approach that has been developed by Manfred Max Neef. It's called fundamental human needs, because he has thought a lot about how to conceptualize needs. And I cannot go into all the depth here, but I want to highlight a few kind of features of his thinking about needs, because I think they are very important. So the first is, Max Neef is an anthropologist and an economist, or was. He died a few years ago. His idea was that needs are universal. So all people have the same needs and always had the same needs. That's a very strong assumption, you could say, but it's an anthropological approach to defining needs. So he says there's a limited number of universal human needs that is stable across times and across cultures. And you see the list here of the needs that he came up with. So people want to be protected. They don't want to be at risk. They want to be able to provide for themselves. They want to develop an identity. They want to relax every now and then and wind down. Yeah, you see all these needs. So he says these are fundamental human needs. The second very important distinction is that between needs and satisfiers. And if I want one thing, if I want you to take one thing from this lecture, is to think about this distinction between needs and satisfiers, because it's very interesting, I think. So he says, while we have limited number of needs, we have unlimited numbers of satisfiers, ways how we can meet these needs. Yeah? So clothing, for example. In Germany, we have many young people go shopping for fashion very frequently. Yes, there's fast fashion, there are fast fashion retailers. They change their collections sometimes twice a week in the big metropolitan areas. Twice a week, new collection. So if you want to keep up with the others, you really have to also purchase a lot of clothes. But Max Neef would say clothes are not a need. We don't have needs for clothes. Clothes help us to meet certain needs, that we are protected, that we don't freeze, or we don't sweat too much, that we show affection to groups. When I go to my football team, I wear the shirt, the jersey of my team, yeah, because I belong to that group. We can be very creative to express our identity with clothes we maybe even make ourselves. So I think the point is clear that there's a distinction between needs and satisfiers. And he also says that not all satisfiers are equally good at meeting our needs. Yeah, if you go to the shopping, to the fast fashion retailer 3 times a week, it might give you the idea that it helps you meet your needs, but it might actually not do a very good job at that. Or there might be better satisfiers that can help you to meet your need. So that's the kind of thinking around needs that Max Neef has come up with. And for example, if you think about maybe going home after this lecture or at the end of your day, I'm sure many of you have to work afterwards still. So how can you meet your need for idleness, for winding down? You can sing with others in a community college. You can meditate. You can watch Netflix or YouTube clips to wind down and relax. You can use drugs. Every country has drugs that are legal. Yeah, it's very interesting. But we have drugs as a satisfier of a need for idleness, for example. But I think when I give you these examples, you can already start to figure out that not all of these satisfiers are equally good at meeting that one need for idleness, and they might also not be good at meeting other needs at the same time. So if you become a drug addict, yeah, it might actually be a violator. It destroys the capacity of a need to be fulfilled, and it also affects other needs. You might lose social belonging. Your need for understanding and participation. Yeah, you might lose many needs. So it's good to think about the quality of need satisfiers as well. So, and with that, I'll stop that short kind of lecture about Max Neef, and I'll come back to education in a second. But I think this is a very strong sentence that he formulated. He says that cultural change, what we're working towards here, yeah, in sustainability, cultural change is the consequence of dropping certain sets of satisfiers and replacing them with others. That is what cultural change is. If we stop using certain satisfiers, we take up new ones, we have cultural change. And this is what we're working towards, in a way, in our space as well. So what can we learn from that kind of theoretical reflections for a needs-based sustainability education? I want to give you examples from 3 different levels, basically, in education for sustainable development. First is pedagogy. So if you want your students to understand not just intellectually what needs and satisfiers are, but if you also want them to relate to this in their own experiences, what is a good satisfier for me? It requires very different skills than those skills that we're often teaching them. Yeah? So if the task is for the students, what are the satisfiers that you use in your everyday life? And then go to the next one. How good are those satisfiers at meeting your needs? It requires a lot of reflection. Students need to really be able to reconnect to themselves. Yeah, how do they feel? How does the using a certain satisfier makes them feel? How does it affect them? And we are in the sustainability space. That's the last one. We can also look at those satisfiers. Going on long-haul flights all the time, it might be a good satisfier to explore the world and to relax or for vacations, whatever. But it might be a very difficult or challenging satisfier when we think about sustainability implications. So if we have a satisfier, we need to think about how good is it at meeting our needs and how sustainable is that satisfier. And ideally, we want to move from unsustainable satisfiers that provide low quality of need satisfaction towards satisfiers that provide high quality of need satisfaction and are more sustainable in their impacts. So I think that is also the challenge that we're working towards, the learning challenge. We have to unlearn our way out of this quadrant into another quadrant. So what did we do in our work to provide the kind of learning environments for students to develop those kinds of skills? As said in the beginning, we worked with mindfulness. I'm not sure if all of you can relate to this term. It comes more from a Buddhist background. But I think it is a practice that we can find in many cultures around the world, yeah? To be able to pause in the moment, to introspect, to look inside, how we are feeling, what are the states and inner states and processes. So mindfulness is as an approach to train these skills, to reconnect with ourselves. And we developed a training, and I'll share a bit about it, how we did research on that in a minute. But we also developed very practical tools. Yeah, this is a toolkit that you can download from the Google folder that I'll share with you. And you see there are different exercises, very practical activities. Yeah? For example, we have the genes journey that you can see here. So we have a personal dimension, a social dimension, and then an environmental dimension. And this one here is an activity, the genes journey, where the participants are asked to sit on their chair, like you are doing now, to close their eyes, to experience where are their clothes, for example, where do they feel their clothes, their jeans, how they feel their feet on the ground. So yeah, I'm just summarizing it. It's an 8-minute exercise. And then they are asked to go back, experiencing their clothes, to think back about the life cycle of that cloth. Yeah? So the jeans, for example, whose work went into these jeans? How do you feel when you think about this? Do you feel guilt? Do you feel thankfulness? Yeah, just what comes up in you when you go through this process and you go through this process. So just to give you an example, so these are kind of activities that we developed. They were part of a training, an 8-week-long training that we delivered to university students and to employees in small and medium-sized enterprises. So here's a vocational connection to also your center. We continued building on this work because we thought that it's difficult to observe satisfiers, but what is maybe easier to observe is how you spend your time. We all have the same amount of time. Time is a democratically allocated resource. We all have 24 hours a day. So what do we spend our time on? Why do we do it? What needs are we trying to meet with that? How good does it do ourselves? Yeah? So students kept their time diaries, and that's the work that Claire has been doing as a PhD also. That was another project, and there's another toolkit. Again, it's in the folder. You can download it and play around with it in your teaching, but to take time as a starting point to think about need satisfaction. And I think this whole movement is gaining some traction. Not sure if you've heard about the IDGs, so not the Sustainable Development Goals, but the Inner Development Goals. So it's an educational approach to train teachers and students to explore their inner worlds. Yeah, and transform their inner worlds, basically. So this is a really interesting approach. And this is the last thing I wanted to share here. We've just released, I think it was in February, a facilitator guide for higher education. So how can we train our colleagues in using these approaches in their classrooms? And that's a facilitator guide for how you can address inner dimensions for sustainability in your discipline, in your subject areas. This is another guidebook where we collected 57 teaching examples from around the world, very small examples, 5-minute activities at times. Again, these two resources are also in the folder. What is important, and I come to an end here now with this part, is that this is not just about our subjective experience. This is important, and we are trying to explore it, but we need to reach out from there. Once we've understood certain needs satisfiers and we began to work with this, I think it's very important to also combine this with what colleagues at Rhodes call T-learning. Transgressive, transformative learning, social critical inquiry. You can ask questions with your students. Why have certain practices of meeting needs become dominant? Why are we using more and more or rely more and more on consumption and spending money for meeting our needs? When you want to meet, when young learners in our context want to meet their friends, they need a mobile phone, they need a contract, they need to spend money. That didn't used to be like that 50 years ago. They were able to meet with their friends and meet their need for meeting friends and belonging in other ways. So why is it and how has it become that certain practices of meeting needs have become so dominant? How can collective modes of need satisfaction be transformed? So not just individually that I change my need satisfiers, but more broadly, how can we do this? What levels of human need satisfaction should be provided to everyone? We argue about this in each country. In our country, there's a debate if, for example, access to television is something that social welfare should provide or not. It's, I think, included now, but there are people objecting this. They say, oh, we don't need this. What interests and power structures support those dominant modes of need satisfaction? Why is it that we have to consume more and more? Who benefits from that? Why is it? And what can we learn also from people in other places, how they meet their needs? There might be interesting things to learn for us. And what can we learn when we go back in time from how our grandparents, for example, have met their needs? So just to kind of explore that this is not just about your own experience, it's also about branching out. So the second level, and I want to keep it short here, is that it also has implications for curriculum. So we are responsible in our team for a subject that has the lovely German name of Sachunterricht. Sachunterricht, yes. Sache is the thing, the issue. It's a word for the thing, the issue. And Unterricht is education or teaching. So we're teaching about things. Yeah, that's basically what this subject is about. And it is the third main subject in German schooling. So we have math, we have language, and we have Sachunterricht in primary education. And Sachunterricht is an integrative subject. So we're combining science education, social studies. So students are not learning about biology. They're learning about this in secondary education, yeah? But they're learning, starting with the phenomenon and exploring the phenomenon and we're starting to build kind of the disciplines here. And I want to show you how that works. So we have what the child experiences, a phenomena, like why is there a rainbow? Why can't the Chancellor of Germany just create a law that bans all unsustainability? Yeah? So children might have questions or everyday lived experiences. And then we're trying to reach out into, okay, what is the historical dimension of it? Why maybe isn't it good if one chancellor can rule everything? We have a strong historical lesson here to learn in Germany about this. Yeah, what are the technical implications of mobile phones, for example? What goes into a mobile phone? Social sciences. So we are trying to build from there and to work with this children's curiosity, basically, to introduce them to more disciplinary thinking. So in our curriculum here, as we're teaching this subject, we are responsible for teacher education in that area. At my university, we are thinking about how a needs-based perspective can help us do that. So if you have a children's experience, how can you use the needs to come up with questions and stimulate questions, and thoughts? For example, in Germany, it's very common for students when they finish school and they go to university to move into their own place, to leave their parents' house. So they start to have their own place, or they share a place with other students. So this having your own place could be an interesting phenomenon for some kids. Maybe they have older siblings and they just moved out. So you can ask questions about, okay, how does having your own space, how does that help you to meet your need for subsistence? How does it, how can you express your identity in the way you furnish your house or you design it, right? How is that historically, has that historically changed? Maybe it wasn't like that 30 or 40 years ago. So several kind of questions that are stimulated by looking at a phenomenon from a needs-based perspective that help us to kind of more organically introduce also the disciplines here. So the last thing I want to mention here is the setting, and that is the setting of the school itself, the school or the university. This, I mean, a lot of work has gone into the idea of whole institution approaches, yeah? And you might have heard about this. So that it's not just about what's happening in the classroom, but that we are learning also outside the classroom. That the whole institution is teaching us, you know, all the time. And we have to be thoughtful about how we design the institutional context to really support ESD learning. So for example, it's the curriculum, of course. What are we teaching in the curriculum? But do they have the chance to also maybe learn to grow food? Do they have the opportunities to participate in decision making, the students? Do they reach out to the community members? Yeah, there are all kinds of different, do we have solar panels, for example? How do we try to, as an institution ourselves, to become more sustainable? So all of these aspects shape learning, not just the curriculum. And that's why the whole institution approach is an interesting lens to look at. And there's also research showing that it is very crucial. So Jorrit Holz, for example, is a German colleague who is in charge of the national monitoring for ESD in Germany. So he has good data sets at his hand. And he could show that the learners that experience more sustainable whole institution approaches, this is what this is about, yeah, whole institution approaches. When learners experience more of those sustainable whole institution approaches, it has an effect on them. They feel more motivated, they feel more empowered to contribute to sustainability. So it's a good investment to start with a whole institution and not just the curriculum. And again, we can use the needs-based approach. Think about your own workplaces. We are doing this as a group also. We have a PhD student who studies research groups. How are they designed in ways to meet the needs of their members? Are we able to meet our need for creativity, for participation, yeah, in our workplace? Or is that suppressed? So also to think about how we design these settings in ways that allow us to meet our needs is an interesting question. So I want to move on and share about a specific elephant in the room, and that is assessment. And I gave this talk at Rhodes before, that's why I had the wrong QR code in here, but the right one is showing up. But the colleagues at Rhodes made fun of me afterwards because they said, I obviously don't know where elephants live. So they took us to Addo Elephant Park. And we could see elephants where they live in the natural habitat. So this is a picture we took just 2 days ago. But the elephant in the room is really assessment. I think we have really made good progress in the learning, teaching activities. We have competencies. Yeah, we have good learning objectives, but the ways we assess students is still very much 20th century and very much mainstream. Yeah, so how can we, and that has effects. I mean, that's data from OECD countries, but 2/3 of all students report that they feel stressed about poor grades. Yeah, more than every second student reports that they are worried about it, taking a test will be difficult. And the last one is particularly impressive, that they feel very anxious about school testing, even when they feel well prepared. So what are we doing to students when we assess them that way? Is that helping us to achieve what we want to achieve with ESD? Yeah, to create agency in students, to wrestle with the unknown. So the question really is how assessment cannot stand in the way and jeopardize what we want to achieve with ESD, but how it can better reflect and support what we are doing in ESD. And I know there's great work also being done in this country by Caleb and others on significant learning assessment. So I think people are starting to move into this space, and you are even ahead. We are just starting to explore this ourselves. But I think it's a very important area to look at when we look at ESD. So we had these persisting challenges, and I think that a needs-based approach can help us with these challenges. Yeah, we had the problem-centric approach. I think a needs-based approach has a more positive vision because it's about meeting human needs. It's about something positive, something we want to achieve and accomplish that is desirable. Maybe it can also help a bit with the contestation and polarization we have, because it's not about the needs anymore, that I don't want you to, I want you to work harder, that you don't get to relax anymore. I'm denying your need for idleness. No, we are discussing about satisfiers. What are the best satisfiers to meet our needs? Yeah, and what are the most sustainable satisfiers that we can find? So it's more of a competition of ideas rather than an ideological battle about, hopefully. And the third one is, it might also help us to re-essentialize ESD, so that it's not a laundry list of everything anymore, but it can be focused, more focused on needs. So the second part then would be, and that's a shorter part, maybe your need for breathing and idleness is also not met by this setting. It's very dense, it's very hot, I'm aware of this, but I would just continue with this part, and then we can maybe open it up for a conversation, is how we can do research using this approach. And I had mentioned the mindfulness project before, and I want to show you these two examples. One is, how can we do this research on assessment, and how we can do needs-based research on mindfulness, on this mindfulness training. So I'll start with the mindfulness one. As I said, it was a training 8 weeks long, and why should you study mindfulness at all? Why is it good for sustainable behavior? What good can it do? We did a systematic literature review. We often do this at the beginning of a project just to understand what is already published, what is already known, where are the gaps, so that we can work in a more focused way. So this is what our literature review revealed. So there's some indications in literature that if you are more mindful, you can disrupt your routines. Yeah? Things you do automatically, you are able maybe to pause, reflect, breathe for a moment, and maybe not fall into routine traps too often. Maybe it can help us to act more in line with our intentions. Maybe we become more pro-social because we develop empathy for others through mindfulness. And maybe we have greater well-being and less materialism through mindfulness. So these were some indications from the systematic review. What we did was we developed this 8-week-long training. The participants had to sit a 90-minute session every week. There was 1 day of mindfulness on a Saturday for 4 hours, and then there was daily homework. They should practice for 20 minutes so that they are regularly kind of practicing. Yeah? And as I said, we had university students and employees. And as researchers, we were very interested in how we can study the experience of the participants. And we agreed that we will need a plural kind of approach. We need multiple sources of data to better understand what this experience is about. So this is more research design, the research design in a very simplified way. So we had an intervention group of 98 participants. We did a pre-test. They filled in a survey before the training, immediately after the training, and then after 16-week a post. At the same time, we had a waitlist control group. Yeah, so the second part of our participants started after the first training had completed. So we had a comparison group, a control group, and they did the same thing. And we conducted interviews with our participants after the training. So this is the data that we collected throughout the training. And it was a pluralistic approach, but it also came with certain research challenges. So what approach to data analysis, for example, should you use when you do a mindfulness training and you collect interview data? How do you analyze that data? The second was, how do you integrate these two? So we have a quantitative study and we have a qualitative study. How do we make sense of, how can you bring them together? And I want to respond briefly to both questions. So to cut it short, the first question, how do you analyze interview data on mindfulness? We did not know. So we made a research project out of that. And we used 4 different approaches to analyze the same interview transcript and see what the different approaches show us in the data. Yeah? So we used discourse analysis, grounded theory. I always struggle to pronounce it, so I'll just keep it IPA. And we have qualitative content analysis. Yeah, 4 different approaches. So they show very different things. Qualitative content analysis is good at, identifying effects. Participants talk about, oh, the training did this to me or did that to me. Yeah, so you can code the effects. We used a semi-open coding approach. So we had some effects already in mind from the literature review, but we also were open to adding new effects that we were not yet aware of. Grounded theory, the focus is very different. It's on individual conditions, the context, the mechanisms of the effects. When did something happen? Why did it happen? What were intervening variables, etc. So we used that. We used IPA to really tap into the participant's subjective experience. Yeah? What is it? Describe your experience. Go really into depth. And we use discourse analysis to understand how the public thinking or the public discourses about mindfulness shape the individual's ideas about mindfulness. Yeah, so we used all 4 approaches, and they showed that it's a paper that we published on that, and it's also in the Google folder if you want to read up on that study. And in some, you can say they did not really show very different things, but they really helped us to see how, for example, certain participants had certain ideas about mindfulness that definitely came from the media and not from their experience, or from other people's word of mouth. So the second challenge was how to integrate it. And there we are in the space of mixed methods, a beautiful space. So you can combine qualitative and quantitative in research questions you ask. The question we came up with was how individual and structural conditions hinder or promote the effectiveness of the training. You can integrate using the sampling. So in our case, we had the quantitative study. We looked at changes, which participants really changed a lot, which did not change at all, or even in the negative direction. And then we used sample from those types of participants' cases that were interesting, for the interviews. So we have a connection here. We interpreted those studies separately, but we tried to integrate them towards the end to really come up with an answer of how effective the training was. And this is how we did it. Yeah, all clear, no? I can walk you very quickly through it. So we conducted 23 interviews, and we had qualitative and quantitative data for each participant. So you see the participants here. Here you see the variables, mindfulness, for example. And here you see quantitative, qualitative. This is sustainable consumption behavior in clothing. This is well-being, material values, etc. So you see the variables. And then we transformed the data to show there was a positive change, there was no change, or there was a negative change here. Yeah, and then as a next step, once we had that data in a form that was commensurable, we developed a typology. And I'm also not going into too much depth here, but we identified 5 types of participants, and that's much more nuanced than the individual results of each study. So we could see that there was a type of participant that really benefited from the training. Mindfulness training is very good for them if they want to become more sustainable. But they already had the intentions to change their behaviors, so they were already unhappy with how unsustainable they acted. They've developed compassion and empathy, and they did a lot of home practice, these participants. A second type, and that's the only other I want to show you, is this type 4. So they had no intentions at all to change. They were in the training because their employer asked them to join, but they didn't really have any intention to become more sustainable. Some of them had a bad conscience. They knew that, oh, what I'm doing is maybe not always very sustainable. Yeah? And they also rarely practiced at home, this type. And interestingly, what they took from the training was, it's important to care for myself. Yeah, so one even reported that they always had a guilty conscience about flying to a sunny place in the winter. The German winter can be very harsh. So flying to the sunny place in the winter, oh yeah, but the sustainability implications, the carbon emissions. And what she took from the training was, I have learned to be good to myself. And if I need it, I just go. Yeah? So it was not what we intended with the training. But just to show you how these understanding the context and mixing the data can help us to really show some effects that we would otherwise not have been aware of. Yes, the second example, and I'm also looking at the time. How much time did we have? I did not remember when we start. I'm about to come to an end, yeah. The second example is, I'll also keep that short, is how the work that we're doing on assessment. And this is really about what we call the reflective practitioner. Yeah, that assessment is nothing where we need, of course you can have standardized large-scale international assessments, and there's nothing per se wrong about this. But our approach really focused on building the agency of the reflective practitioner, teachers as a reflective practitioner. Yeah? So that we are not addressing teachers as implementation agents Yeah, we have all the research findings, we tell teachers, we train teachers on how to use them, and then they implement it in class. Yeah, this is a very managerial approach to practitioners, to deal with practitioners. But we used what is in the literature also described, and that paper is also in the folder, a liberatory approach. So we address teachers as professionals in the social field. They are tasked to develop the human capabilities of their learners, and we are there to support them with the research, and assessment should be part of that. So we start with what is it in their practice that they consider relevant, that they want to change, that they want to improve. So what is it what are the issues that they bring to the table, and not what are the research findings that we need to now implement in the field. And this is basically what is inspiring this UNESCO project. It's a big project that has just started last year, and that's going to run until 2026. And UNESCO has commissioned work to do 3 toolkits. One on whole institution approach, curriculum, and assessment. So 3 approaches, toolkits. And these have been developed, and now we have 11 countries, I think it's on my last slide, 11 countries across the world now implement these 3 toolkits with schools. So we have more than 50 or 60 schools involved, and they are testing these toolkits. Do they help them to improve their practices? And we are studying this, and we are learning from this, and we are taking it to improve the toolkits. So they will be released only at the end of this year, but they will be practically grounded. Yeah? The schools will have worked with them. And this is just in short what we ask the teachers to do, to start with any assessment practice. I don't know what you're using, a written exam. Probably many of you use written exams or multiple choice exams. So how are you assessing? Okay, written multiple choice exams. Why are you doing it that way? What are the learning outcomes you're trying to assess? What is the role of the learner? What is the role of the teacher in the assessment process? To start just describing, no evaluation here, just describing. Next thing then, how aligned is this? Imagine your goal is to create citizens, yeah, that global citizens that are able to act. And then you have them sit a test where they are just the objects of your assessment. No say in what you are testing, how you're testing. There's a contradiction in this, right? Between what you're trying to achieve and how you are running the assessment. So you should check for alignment, for example. How does the assessment help us to meet ESD aspirations? How does it meet your context that you're in? So we ask them, we give them questions basically to address in a step-by-step sequence. What can you do to improve the alignment? Yeah, what things can you add? What can you modify? Maybe you need to replace it. And then teachers will test it, and they will try to learn from this implementation. What happened? What feedback did they receive? What did their colleagues think about this, etc.? And what can they learn about this? So this is really an action research circle, yeah, in that sense. I'm going to skip the example because there's an example in the slides, but you get it if you want to understand what that might look like, this step. Yeah, there's an example of an assessment here that speaks to all of these steps. And there's also an academic paper presenting this framework, and I'm happy to add it to the folder once it's out. It's coming out every day now. Yeah, with that, I think I've reached the end. Just to let you know that we are not just a single unit basically in a university, we are also a UNESCO chair. WITS has a UNESCO chair as well. We've just met before, as I said, and there are many interesting connecting points, so I want you to at least be aware of these opportunities that come with a UNESCO chair. Our chair is 20 years old now. We have our focus is on implementing ESD in higher education. We are running a UniTwin network with different partners across the world. We have Rhodes, for example, from South Africa also as a partner in that network. And there are ways to engage and collaborate with us. You see many, many different ESD partners, and you see WITS is even a partner of our extended network. So there's also opportunities for master students to just reach out to us, connect with us, get engaged also in this network if you want to add a global dimension to your work. And with that, I think I'll skip the other slides so that we have time. And I'd like to show this. I hope you don't feel like I'm this vehicle and I ran over you, but I hope that it was fast and it was a lot, but that you also enjoyed and got some inspiration. So thank you for bearing with me. Here's the QR code if you want to access the Google folder, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with you.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
That was really good. And it's also very good to hear how people are doing research, but how the research you can take things from and actually apply it. You know, I could see so many of our students and even some of the kind of colleagues that are here from the School of Education and other colleagues, little things that you can think about linking. And that's why it's always good to hear about how others are thinking about their research, how they're approaching their research, the kinds of methodologies they're doing. So we hope, you know, and I think Daniel did such a good job of sharing that practice, how he's thinking about it, how he's planning, how Daniel's thinking about it, how he's planning the research, what kind of methods. And those are the things we hopefully have given you many ideas. So we're going to open so that we can have a bit of a conversation with Daniel, and I hope that you have some interesting questions around Daniel's presentation. So I'll open. Okay. If you can just introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and then you can ask your question. And just to also say, while you're all thinking about your questions, is those of you that know our center, the Center for Researching Education and Labor, and you see Tim at the back there, we generally tape our seminars and we load it onto the Vitrail YouTube channel. So you'll find this seminar as well as lots of other seminars there as well. Most of them are taped and loaded on. So you will find, and we'll let Deepika and the colleagues know as well, if you want to re-listen to Daniel in in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Okay, over to you.
Afternoon, colleagues. Amazing seminar presentation. Thank you very much. My name is Fischer. I'm from the Direct Science and Tech Division. I am currently doing my Master's in Education, being supervised by Dr. Caleb. I have a few questions. I think I have like 5.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for one, yes. No, you're going to ask one.
I'm going to ask all of them. So, the first question is, how do you think educators can encourage awareness without overwhelming students about the negativity that may stem from learning about the detrimental effects of human development on the environment?
Okay, right. I think I get the gist of the question, and I think it's something that Daniel kind of opened. You know, how do we move beyond that kind of problem-centric way? But I'll leave this to Daniel. I'll take 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll hand over to Daniel.
My name is Lulu Makolane. I'm one of the researchers here at Rio. And I'm quite interested, I don't know which slide you were dealing with, but when you were dealing with the ecosystem of the network where you had the classes, and that really reminds me of Professor Robert Donahue's concepts of indigenous knowledge, the integration of indigenous knowledge, which has been pioneered a lot in the global south. And maybe the global north is starting to catch up. So what are the are you learning from the global south? Are you seeing any complementary?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, politician. She's a political economy researcher. So.
Thank you.
But anyone else? Any other questions? Yeah?
Yeah, mine is just a comment. What struck me is Mahmoud's within needs or what? It aligns very well with what I know about Maslow's theory of needs.
Okay, the links between that and Maslow, okay?
Since Prof mentioned one of the quite interesting, that is an article by Jacqueline, and I was working on a project when I come across that paper or article. Now, I was stuck in the middle of trying to sort of challenge or critique what the author indicates there, because I was like, yes, this is addressing global issues, Now, if you come in with a title like you don't want to educate your own children for education for sustainable or for sustainability, what do you mean? Hence I'm saying maybe I can find out from Prof to say maybe there's something that is like talking to the other community to say this is how we can maybe approach the issue of education for sustainable development.
Okay. The essence of Jickling's argument in that old paper. Meryl, I can see a question on your face. Is that? You want? Okay. All right. Daniel, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, thanks. Very rich first round. Thank you for these many questions. So I'll try to keep it short so that we can have more conversations. The first was on how you can create awareness without overwhelming students and learners, right? This was, yeah. I think the first part of the needs-based approach, how I positioned it, was really an attempt to answer that question by focusing on needs and what stands in our way of meeting needs. That this is a different narrative. You know, you could also say psychologically it's a gain frame. It's not a loss frame. We're about to lose something, and then we get nervous and active. But it's a gain frame, without denying the problems. Yeah, this is very important. It's not about denying. Another quick response is there's also an interesting development which is called solutions-oriented ESD. A colleague of ours at our institute, Thomas Hoffmann, he has worked a lot on that. And he did textbooks in Germany that are mandatory that follow this approach. So remember the cover pages of the textbooks, yeah? Plastic waste at the ocean, etc., littering. He starts with solutions. So, for example, there are boats that have been built by Dutch students to collect microplastic in the ocean. And then he starts with that. He presents that solutions, and then the students begin to think: what problem is it actually attacking or addressing? Is it an appropriate solution? Is it effective? Does it miss certain things? But they have to start with the actual inquiry with a different mindset. It's about developing solutions for problems and not being overwhelmed by problems. So there are some ideas about how to do it, but I still think it's a sensitive space. So there's no talking around this. The second is indigenous perspectives. Yes, we had a meeting. I gave the talk at Rhodes. Rob was also there in the room. He also made me aware of certain kind of connections that are there to his work. I can say for myself that I'm here to start that inquiry for myself. Yeah, so I'm more at the beginning. I know someone like Claire, for example. She has worked a lot on post-colonial education, and she's far more advanced in this space. But yes, this is about exploring together, and this is also what my great hope is for this Erasmus project. We have 3 years now to work with 10 partners in sub-Saharan Africa on how to innovate ESD and bring it into the curriculum. And there are 4 partners from the Global North and 10 partners from the Global South or sub-Saharan area. So yeah, this is, I guess, where I stand in my journey here. The third is the needs, the Maslow. Maslow is, I hope you're all aware of the Maslow pyramid, that you have the very physical needs at the bottom, yeah, and then you have the more self-realization needs, yeah, at the top. Some people have added a more fundamental pillow, which is Wi-Fi, but this is a joke. But there is this work, and I think it has done it has really its merits, yeah, that it raised kind of specifically in the field of economics a perspective on needs, but it has also been criticized, you know, that it has this kind of stage idea. And I talked about the German history, for example, but if you are a soldier and you are forced to shoot someone, yeah, there are examples in history that show that it's not only about maintaining your own life. You can also decide to not do it, and even if you have to die yourself. You have examples of that in your own country. So that self-realization is not something that comes necessarily behind. So there are some critiques, and also why we went with Max Neef, but this is an open conversation, is that really the anthropological idea that this is fundamental to all human beings. The last one, the jiggling paper, I think if you haven't read it, I would really encourage you to read it. It's still an interesting and timely paper because the debates, many debates we have are still around these questions. So his point is very much, and correct me if you have a different reading of it, his point is very much that, there was this policy enthusiasm with Agenda 21. Yeah, now we are coming together, we are merging development and the environmental protection. And here's the program, several hundred pages, and now we are going to implement it, and let's call on education to do its part. Yeah? So he says, education is always about reflexivity, about challenging structures, and he saw the risk that we are losing sight of this, and we are losing this along the way. And so that's why he wrote this very provocatively titled paper. Yeah. But I think his point is very, very well received, and today we have this distinction. I don't know if this is a common distinction in your space here between ESD 1. You know, sometimes we know that certain things are good or bad, and we should teach children. Food waste, for example, you mentioned this topic. What we know about food waste, we should teach children so that they can behave that way. But we shouldn't just stay with behavior. Yeah, we also need to educate them as citizens. So that's ESD 2, that they also challenge what we say. Yeah, maybe we need to be challenged by students as well. So to build these two capacities, and I think Jiggling was very much trying to make that point back then already in a different language.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Just follow up on
Introduce yourself.
Francine Ducler, School of Education, but also associate with Green. I'm also into political economy, but I'm mainly about change, and I'm curious about your intervention in certain schools to change. Because when we look at, and I don't want to generalize, but when we look at our education system, we're talking 80-20. 20% of relatively functional school and 80 are not. And to bring up the critical thinking alone is extremely difficult, and we notice that all the way through university. So now you're talking about mindfulness, etc., reflexivity. I think in the country, and our country in Europe too, the critical thinking can easily lead to that. But from our point of view, I don't understand how the 80% of our school could start to change towards what intervention we're talking about.
Okay, it's a big, can have a big discussion about that. Francie? All right, Kate and then Caleb.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm also a researcher here at Real Center. What was particularly interesting for me is your presentation on mindfulness, and it made me think about my work on working for the common good. And ESD was one of the elements that came out of my research in terms of how the common good can be enacted through education and training. And the relationship between, so now not looking at education on the environment as just that, but also through mindfulness, right? And so thinking about the well-being economy and all those and how they are linked. And it would be very interesting for me to find out, because with the common good, the perception is that when the space is shared, it's not my responsibility, but if it affects me, then I will take charge in terms of the common good. So it will be interesting for me to find out, through mindfulness, does that impact the way people react or how they enact the information that they are receiving in terms of in their lives and within, their environment?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. There was somebody, Caleb, sorry.
Mine is a silly comment. Having observed your contribution, my apologies, I had to run out, so I missed the beginning. But I picked up that this is one of the approaches that we can use in ESD. I'm coming from a history of working with issues, sustainability issues, environment and sustainability issues. And it has been an entrance point. Then came alternatives, better alternatives, solar and them. Then came solutions. These are solutions. And today we are even talking about flourishing in education. We are talking about the common good that she mentioned in education. We are talking about the needs now. And critical approaches she mentioned are some of the approaches that, and mentioned transformative, transgressive approaches. And when it comes to the needs, what is the content of that process of one reflecting on themselves? What are the issues that one could start reflecting on so that they,
Okay. All right. Caleb, I'm going to take one more. Yeah, Meryl, just introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for a very interesting, thought-provoking talk. The question I wanted to ask picks up on the group you worked with. You said it was a mix of higher education students and then employees that are in a small and medium enterprise environment. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more. Were there differences that emerged between those two groups? They, I suppose, different stages in their lives and maybe different considerations and concerns. If you can give us a little bit more, particularly on the work environment, those already in a work environment, and their receptivity to this and take on it, and what was found. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the next round. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. So, yeah, let me recap. So the first question was about change. And you mentioned 80-20. And if I understood correctly, how can the 80% change?
Any intervention in the 80% of dysfunctional schools.
Dysfunctional schools, yes. Yeah. I have to say, I mean, maybe I can give two responses. The first would be that I feel a bit uncomfortable commenting on this in this space. Yeah. I have very little familiarity with the system here to really provide a solution.
Sorry to interrupt, but we've had some Swiss people, etc., talking a lot about school for immigrants. And I think that might be an interesting parallel.
Schools for immigrants, okay. Thank you. Yeah, my second question would have been that, response would have been that I think as we're developing toolkits also for UNESCO now, we are more and more starting to also really think about it from an implementation perspective and from a perspective of resistance or opposition. So maybe this ties a bit to what you're saying. Also in our context, I mean, we do have a few rather dysfunctional schools as well. So it's not that we don't have this problem at all. But there's a lot of schools that are not taking up ESD. They feel overwhelmed. They have other issues. They prioritize other issues. So when we advocate for ESD and we want to really bring this into the education system, to start with the opposition. So we had a few master theses on this topic, for example, and we're starting with discourses of resistance now. So, for example, if you have a challenging socioeconomical backgrounds of your students, how can that be an argument for ESD? How can ESD help you to address these problems? That's what I meant with the reflective practitioner. What are their needs? Yeah, what are the issues that they are dealing with? And how can we wrap our own heads around these issues and think about ways that ESD can help them, rather than communicating it as something they should do on top of everything else that it's required. It's not a full answer to your question, but a reflection on that. The second is, Kate, you asked about mindfulness as a common good. So what we saw in the training was that there are we were interested in sustainability effects. Do they change behaviors, for example, or do they think differently about issues? But there was also this dimension of pro-social behavior. Maybe that relates a bit to the common good. Yeah, and if you remember the three modules, the self, the social, and the ecological sphere. So the second was very much about that. And we saw some positive effects on pro-social behavior. So that we saw fewer effects or no effects on in the quantitative study on sustainable behaviors, unfortunately. But it seemed to have really strengthened their ability to experience empathy, for example, with others, and compassion. So I think that is a promising approach if you want to work towards the commons in that sense. That was not our focus, but I think there is some indications that would be worthwhile to pursue further. Caleb, you mentioned what is the content of needs? What would be the content of a needs-based approach? Yeah, I think it is a bit abstract, and that's where we stand in our thinking about this. We try to ground it a bit with mindfulness and other activities, but I can give you an example from teacher education, how I teach, mentioned it or brought it up in my classroom with the primary school teachers, pre-service teachers. So in Germany, we have the hedgehog. It's a very well-known animal that is living in parks also, that children know about and that we have also in the curriculum. So we are supposed to teach about animals in the children's livelihoods. So how it's being traditionally done is children draw pictures, they get some information, they fill in worksheets, maybe they also, maybe at best visit a place, an outdoor education place that teaches them about it. But from a needs-based perspective, you could start with the questions of the students. So, for example, why, as a teacher told me actually that she had that experience with her children. They were wondering in the park why the people screw together, all the leaves that fall from the trees. But that's where the hedgehogs live over winter. So why are they doing it? Why are they destroying the homes of the hedgehogs? Yeah? And that is a very good question to pursue. So, what would happen if you leave the fallen leaves there? What would happen to the people that that work for the public municipality cleaning it? They might lose their jobs, for example. Their needs might be affected. What would be the recreational value of the park for people who enjoy kind of walking around and maybe also on wheelchairs? And so to really start to think about this, and then also who takes which decision? What should we do? What could be a better solution than just removing all the fallen leaves? What could be a better solution that the kids could think about, and who could help them to, or what would be the decision-making processes? Who would they have to talk to make a change? So we are just starting out from the phenomena and starting to build a more complex, I think, experiences for the learners, that go beyond what they are traditionally taught. So that's how we are using it right now, to ask good questions, to see more facets of the problem, basically. It's more of a process approach than a content. Yeah. And the last question was about small and medium-sized enterprises. Was it your question? Yes. So I'm happy to also add the results paper of the study on the small and medium-sized enterprises if you're particularly interested in that. We did see some differences between the groups. But it's also because of sampling. I mean, this is a training, you saw the numbers. We had small and medium-sized enterprises that were very young, progressive startups, that paid a lot of attention to work-life balance and well-being of their employees. But we saw some differences also in just how students experience stress during university and how these employees from small and medium-sized enterprises experience stress in these rather productive environments. But so it was more that the students benefited more from the training than the small and medium-sized enterprise employees. But I'm happy to share more detailed results on that. So we do a third round?
Yeah.
Yes. Quick.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. One thing that motivated me to come was I work with Fischer and PEDAGOGIES, and I always ask them, can you explain to me what exactly is sustainable development or sustainability education? And that's what motivated me to come. But now I feel like I'm more confused than before.
That means you're reflective, so that's being reflexive, so that's okay.
Now I'm thinking, it's like it's everything, and yet the same thing is not everything. In my context as a teacher educator, now when I was looking at what you were presenting, so in terms of assessment, what is it? In terms of, is it a teaching approach? Is it what you should consider when you're assessing? What should the campus look like? Can you help me there?
That's a whole lifetime of practice that you have. That's not a quick question. Is there anyone else with a question? Yeah, would you introduce yourself and then?
Yeah. Sorry, I came in a bit late with my team from Kenyatta University, Kenya. And my name is Dr. Doka Soteno. I'm a UNESCO chair at Kenyatta University on higher education for green economy and sustainability. And that just, I think, demonstrates the interdisciplinarity of ESD. But many people get more confused. So as she started talking, I just said, this is one of the people. In my university, you know, when you talk about ESD, people think that this is an area of study that just belongs to the School of Education.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
To demystify that, to get all the schools involved, to sell this idea to all the other schools. And it's for that reason that my team, please just 1 second, if you can stand up, my team. This one. If you can. This young man, I actually taught him in secondary school. But he's a professor, where I'm not yet. And he's in School of Creative Arts.
So I teach film.
That's sustainability.
Sustainability. And a very effective way of communicating ESD. And that is our university curriculum developer. If he does not accept your curriculum, you're done. Now, so my challenge is, how can we enhance interdisciplinarity of ESD?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here with this team. My background is education. My thing is ESD. But I decided, let me demonstrate how you can move out of the School of Education or education to actually demonstrate how to solve sustainability problems practically.
Yes.
It's very good to meet you.
We need a long talk on that.
Yes, it's very good to meet you, Dorcas, and I can tell you a little bit about my journey in this ESD space, because it's been the journey that I have taken, and actually looking at ESD beyond the school, and actually continuously asking the question of the children from schools, what kind of workplaces are they going to transition into? So we've managed to craft and build a field of research now, both locally and globally, that's and the Germans have given it a name, they call it VESD. Wow. But and I think that there's a lot of work happening around those types of issues. But it's an important question. And just to actually say for the colleagues that are new, Daniel mentioned the Decade for Education for Sustainable Development, that I led the writing of the South African report at the end of the decade to actually report on what we had done during the decade. And one of the findings were our work was overwhelmingly focused on teachers and schools only, with a whole lot of other gaps in the type of ESD work and how ESD was being conceptualized within the thing. So there's a lot of work for many people to do, those of you that are interested in this space. I'm going to open last question, and then I'm going to hand to Daniel and close. Anyone? Those are two big questions, Daniel. Yeah. So I think that, and you probably will be here until,
My hand was up, and I was like, I can't really leave this space with this. Just this morning, I played one of my students in here because we were talking sustainability, sustainable development goals in our GEO methodology. Now, I'm checking if I can connect what we're saying based on our CAPS document, that's the Curriculum and Assessment Policy Statement, Geography, FET, because we're moving from the point of what is it that the department or the government or the system requires from the teachers? What are they looking for? What is this type of learner that they envisage with this curriculum? So we're checking there, we're saying for us to achieve the sustainable development goal, it starts with teaching. So we're checking the issue of the values, the attitude. Now we're saying as a class this morning, connecting, I think, the concept of mindfulness that we are referring to this afternoon. How can I then relate to the very same attitude and the values? Because we're saying if one is addressing that environmental issue in a school environment, my learners should develop that behavior, or they should change in that particular behavior and adopt a new kind of that is behavior. In other words, there's a change of mind, change of attitude. They will then value, starting with their own, that is schooling environment. They will value the first environment, which is locally, school setting. If there's littering as an issue in the school, they will start saying, no, not in our school premises. And that will move to the community. And from the community to their own, that is a region or province. And with that, we'll then achieve the sustainable development.
Thank you so much.
We're talking attitude and value.
Yeah.
How do you value this environment if you are not protecting the environment?
Thanks a lot. Daniel? Quick wrap-up points. You can just give some reflective wrap-up. Those were all very large questions.
Yeah, these were very large questions. Maybe I think I don't want to take another 10 minutes to wrap up, so maybe I can really start with your point, because I think it's a relevant one that goes back to Bob Jickling's paper already. So what is it actually? And so I think the main message that I'm always trying to, and not me myself, also many others are trying to preach, is that this is, please do not address it as a topic. It's not a topic that we add to an already overcrowded curriculum. Yeah? Zoom out of your own experience, look at the state of the world, and then sustainability is two things in my view. It's about safety and about justice. Yeah? I don't know if you know this donut. Oh, I may use this one if yeah? So you have the planetary boundaries, climate, biodiversity laws, nitrogen. So what are the systems of the planet that we are pushing? And then we have an inner circle. So what are the human needs that we must not fall short of? Yeah? We need to protect minimum standards for human needs. And then we have a nice space in between. And this is the challenge of our time. How do we move in this space that is safe from the outside and that is just from the inside? That's a simple idea of sustainability. And this is a learning challenge. That's what I want to teach our students. I mean, I'm in teacher education, so I'm very biased. Think about the window of my office. Yeah, it's looking at teacher education. But this is what I want teacher educators to understand, that it's not a topic. We need education and learning, and they are professionals in this space. They need to wrestle with these challenges because they are so crucial to our times. So how do we learn our way into this nice space that is safe and just? I don't know if that makes more sense. But in a nutshell, this is really, I think, what the contribution of education is, not to implement a policy topic. Mm-hmm. It's a big answer to a big question.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. And a huge thank you to all of you. It was really good making contact. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. And hopefully we'll add you to our database. And except for our Kenyan colleagues, you're very welcome to join us whenever we have a seminar, and our German colleagues. But we'll add you to our database and keep in contact. But it was really nice making contact with all of you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about all of y'all's work emerging. And really, especially all the WITS people, to see more work coming out in the school around sustainability issues. So thanks very much, everyone. And a huge another round of applause for Daniel, please. It's always a good seminar, Daniel, where you're
Well, you run over.
And people are still have questions to ask. All right. Thanks, everybody.